So now we're going to go on to the main showcase of US election material, starting with an introduction to the resources we'll be using today. The first is American Consumer Culture. This is the complete digital run of the market research reports of Ernest Dichter. He was the foremost marketing consultant and researcher of his day, using in-depth qualitative studies as well as traditional surveys to investigate the psychology of people as consumers. However, his research touched on much more than this, and as we'll see later, he informed politics as well as private enterprise. The second resource is Popular Culture in Britain and America, 1950 to 1975. This resource uses manuscript and rare printed material, as well as photographs, ephemera, and memorabilia, to tell the story of this dynamic period of social, political, and cultural change. We also have African American Communities, which predominantly focuses on African American history in Atlanta, Chicago, St. Louis, and New York, along with some towns and cities in North Carolina. It presents multiple aspects of African American life in these communities through a variety of documents, pamphlets, newspapers, letters, official records and reports, and detailed oral histories. So more on these resources later, but the one I'd like to start with is American History 1493 to 1945, as this contains some documents from the foundation of the United States that still impact the presidency to this day. The resource itself is in two parts. The first one covers initial European settlement, the Revolutionary War, and trade, commerce, and government through the first half of the 19th century. And then part two contains many Civil War documents and continues through Reconstruction and the two World Wars. Now, if you're new to an Adam Matthew resource, the main navigation bar here at the top of the page is the best way to get around. And as well as the main headings, we've also got these subheadings that will take you to individual pages. The introductory pages here, there provide some context for the collection, information on where the documents were sourced from and the scope of the resource, while the heart of any Adam Matthew collection is provided by the documents. Now, American history is particularly large. There's 60,000 documents in it in total. So you're offered the chance to browse them by date, theme, document type, or sub-collection. Or you can choose to view all documents. The other feature that I'd like to highlight is the Explore Archive Folders feature. So this aims to replicate the archival collection. If you went into the Gilder Lehrman archive, you could find, for example, the Aaron Hobart collection on the shelf. Well, here you can put it into your right-hand search, click search, and it will take you to documents that make up that collection. Now, on any document list or search results list, you'll find filter options, which will allow you to limit your search. And the idea of these and the idea of the archive folders is all about providing different options for browsing so that you can really refine any search and get to material that is directly relevant to you. Now, for this first part of the webinar, I wanted to pick out a couple of highlights from this earlier material. I'm going to do this by accessing one of the secondary features in American history. So if we go to the Explore tab at the top of the page, and History of America in 100 Documents. Now, the idea behind this feature was to draw out 100 treasures from the Gilder Lehrman collection. You can filter them by theme, or you can go down to these tiles to read about one of them. And after an initial introduction, you can click Read More. So we have the images and an overview here. But we can also click into the full document. Now, this is an early printing of the United States Constitution, which has been edited by hand by Pierce Butler, who was one of the members of the Constitutional Convention. You can see the metadata that's being collected for this document by the team here at Adam Matthew and also in the Gilder Lehrman Institute. And if you click on these thumbnails, it will take you to the image viewer. From here you can browse through the pages of the document, or jump straight to one that you're interested in. And you can also toggle onto full screen mode to get a better view. Zoom in and out to aid reading. So you can see that we have a high quality scan of the original document, and this section is actually about the executive power of the United States. And I love this because you can really see how a new system is being debated and organised. So for example, the oath that the president has to swear during inauguration, which is down here. So the printed constitution says, "I, so-and-so, solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States of America." And then on the left here, Butler has added, "and will to the best of my judgment and power preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States." So here we have the foundations of the presidency. And just one more highlight that I wanted to pick out. If we go back to the History of America in 100 Documents feature, one of the linked documents to the Constitution is this letter. Again, I'm going to view the full document. And this is a letter from George Washington to his friend and former military colleague Henry Knox, written on the eve of assuming the presidency. Now we could click to view the original images like we did before. We could also click to download those original images as a PDF. But on this occasion I want to highlight another feature of the metadata, which allows you to show or hide a transcript of the original manuscript document, or you can download it as a PDF. So here we have Washington's letter. And it's interesting because he describes great anxiety at taking on the office of president. He notes he has little political experience, and he fears that his popularity that's come off the back of the Revolutionary War won't last very long, and he'll be deserted by all men pretty soon. So hopefully these two documents have set up our discussion nicely today. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Michael Patrick Cullinane, who has very kindly agreed to join us today. Mike is an associate professor in US history at the University of Northumbria, having previously taught and researched at University College Cork. In 2012, he published Liberty and American Anti-Imperialism, 1898 to 1909, a book that explores the opposition to early 20th century American foreign policy. This year, he is publishing two monographs, one with Edinburgh University Press titled The Open Door Era, US Foreign Policy in the 20th Century, and a second with Louisiana State University Press called Theodore Roosevelt's Ghost, The History and Memory of an American Icon. Michael is also the editor of a book series on the American presidency. For today, he has been looking at some of the documents that shed light on consistent themes in presidential elections and how they illuminate past attempts to appeal to voters.
Okay, thanks, Ben, and hi, everybody. My name is Mike, and I thought I would run through some of the primary source material that relates to the buildup and the aftermath of U.S. presidential elections from the 19th to the 20th centuries that are available in the Adam Matthews collection. And I'll hopefully give you a sense of the historical resources that are available, both in terms of the chronology, the breadth of time that it spans, as well as the various types of resources that are available. And when I was trawling the database, I couldn't help but think about this year's election, the result of which we've only just learned about. And I think this is one of those elections that will probably go down in history as one of the most, I suppose, a watershed moment of sorts where American politics has changed forever. But it's not the only time that's happened. In fact, there's been many elections that have transformed the political landscape. And I think many of them have had some of the same prominent issues. Indeed, some of those issues have been at the heart of the 2016 debates between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And there's been a litany of smaller party candidates that have brought up similar issues in the past as well. Now, there are exceptions to all of these rules. Certainly, 2016 was unique in some ways. No candidate has ever been caught on a hot mic bragging about sexual assault. And likewise, there's never been a candidate who's faced an email scandal, at least in part, because email didn't exist prior to the Reagan administration. So there are exceptions. That not every election is the same, of course, but I think it's safe to say that the big issues in 2016 have been issues that have come up in the past before. And I think there's three issues that, for me, really exemplify this. So number one is on the issue of immigration. And you can think about how many times we've heard about a certain wall and a certain country that was going to pay for building it in 2016. Second, there is the issue of managing party politics and national expectations around bipartisanship. And you could think here about the rancorous primary battles in the Democratic and Republican parties. You could think about the prospect of third-party tickets that did not come to pass, like Mike Bloomberg's threat to run, or those that did make it to Election Day, like Libertarian Gary Johnson or the Green Party candidate Jill Stein. Or you could even think about the last question that was posed in this year's second presidential debate, when a town hall audience member asked if there was anything nice the candidates could say about each other. And finally, a third issue is perhaps religion. And here you can recall things like the Mormon-led dissent against Trump in Utah, leaked emails criticizing Catholic voters, the Jewish lobby on foreign policy, and the proposed ban on Muslims, or even the alt-right's courtship of evangelical voters. In fact, it's often been said that Americans will elect anyone for president except one type of person, an atheist. Now, with these issues in mind, I thought I would pull up a few historical documents that nicely relate to 2016. So let me share my computer screen. Okay, that's great. So on the issue of immigration, in terms of what's available in the Adams-Matthews collections, we're really spoiled for choice. I mean, that's probably because immigration is a perennial favorite of both Republicans and Democrats as a campaign issue. And you could think back here to the 1920s when eugenics was a thriving ideology, or to the 1950s when communism was a subversive force found particularly amongst foreign immigrants, or indeed to 2000 when Cuban toddler Elian Gonzalez, who migrated to Florida with his mother, but whose father remained in Cuba, became an iconic personality for Hispanic immigrants that in many ways probably swayed votes away from Al Gore in a state where a few hundred votes and hanging chads decided the outcome of the race. But for me, there's no period in American history that is more notorious for anti-immigration sentiment than the 1840s and 1850s. Then, anti-Catholicism and anti-popish rhetoric was rife and targeted new immigrant sets from both Ireland and Germany. The anti-immigrant feeling was so powerful that a political party was founded in 1843. So if you thought Trump was bad, well, there was an entire political party dedicated to anti-immigration in the 1840s. And it was called the Native American Party, although I expect they did not have any so-called American Indians among their ranks. No, this was a party that was more commonly referred to as the Know-Nothings, because when members were asked about their activities, they said that they knew nothing. And they were associated with secret societies like the Freemasons as well. The document I decided to pull up is a broadside from the American Republican Party of Kingston, New York. Here it is. It's an 1845 local party that is a platform from 1845 from this local party that was in some ways the precursor to the Know-Nothings. You can read about some of the resolutions that they pass in 1845 to rid the United States of all Roman Catholics on Earth, all Roman Catholic countries on Earth, which are sending their millions of cast-offs and vagabonds to take the liberties we now enjoy. If that doesn't sound familiar to us nowadays, I'm not sure what does. And what's more, the broadside asserts that anti-immigration sentiment is a long tradition in U.S. history. The Know-Nothings are doing, in their opinion, no more than our patriotic fathers did. If we had taken Washington's advice, we would have no cause for complaint. Now, the Know-Nothings reached their height of influence in the 1852 election when legendary Whig Senator Daniel Webster ran for president but died unexpectedly during the campaign, and in 1856 when disgraced President Millard Fillmore returned to politics after the Whig Party dissolved. Fillmore, as a know-nothing, won one state, Maryland, but he garnered over 40% of the vote in 10 other states, all of which were Southern. So for me, Donald Trump is definitely a new brand of anti-immigration rhetoric that perhaps we haven't seen before, but it is not the first. The Know-Nothings in very many ways are the first and far more popular strain of anti-immigration party or rhetoric in American politics. Now, a second issue I mentioned is bipartisan collaboration and inter-party politics. And I've got a considerable amount to reference here with this issue, because regardless of topical issues of any campaign or any time, the egos of politicians mean that internal party spats tend to provide the basis for primary battles. And furthermore, it's the job of every successful president to act on behalf of those people that didn't vote for them, as much as it is their duty to represent those who did. Oh, and there's one further thing. Politicians want to win. Even the most notable American presidents want this, which is why I include here a campaign poster from the 1864 election, when Abraham Lincoln, arguably the very best in our pantheon of presidential heroes, chose Andrew Johnson as his running mate. Now, Johnson was a Tennessee tailor come politician. He was a Unionist, meaning that he lamented the secession of Confederate states that in part caused the Civil War. But Johnson was also a typical fence-sitting politician, looking for ways to compromise on slavery, but remaining uncompromising in terms of the American Union. And that staunch stand in terms of being a Unionist forced him to flee the state for the duration of the Civil War, but also prompted Lincoln to add Johnson to his 1864 election ticket. He believed that adding Johnson would build bridges between the North and the South, and most importantly, that it would allow Lincoln to win a closely contested election in places like Kentucky and Missouri, border states that still planned to vote in the election. In fact, Lincoln officially ran as a national Unionist, which is something that you might not recall. But you'll see here, this is the poster, the Temple of Liberty, Lincoln and Johnson, president, vice president, prosperity, and pictured in agrarian terms. And then nowhere on here do you see anything about the Republican Party. What you do see is the Grand National Union banner for 1864, Liberty, Union, and Victory. So Lincoln ran in 1964 not as a Republican, but as a member of the National Union Party, which only ran once ever. And of course, Lincoln wins by a sizable margin. In part, some say because of Johnson, but also because the war itself was turning at this time. The final document that I want to look at, based on those three issues that I talked about, the last one being religion, is a photograph. And this is a photo of Harry Truman that's signed by Harry Truman at the bottom of the image here. He's sitting at his desk and he's reading his Bible. Now, Truman was brought up in Missouri where his family worshipped at a Presbyterian church, but more often than not, in later life, worshipped in a Baptist church. So he's a little bit of both sects. These Protestant sects are renowned in the South and Midwest for what are known as revivals, or one-week-long services designed to whip up religious affinity and bring new converts to the faith. Now, Truman, despite his upbringing in these faiths, did not speak often about religion and even rejected the revivals of his youth. As the first Baptist president, Truman annoyed many preachers in his day by using words like hell and damn in certain speeches. But, like all good politicians, Truman knew the value of a photo op and of the power of religion amongst voters. He dutifully posed with his Bible and signed this to Nathan Josselson, who was a Virginia war vet who helped Truman stump for votes in the 1948 election. The reason why this is interesting is because 1948 has often been equated to 2016 as an election that everyone thought was going to go one way, but went the other way. So there's a famous photo as well from this election with Harry Truman holding up a newspaper that says, Dewey beats Truman. But in the end, we know that Truman won that election. Well, Virginia was one of the most important swing states, much like this year the Rust Belt was. Truman won Virginia by about 5% in the end, or 28,000 votes over Thomas Dewey. The secret to his success might have been his ability to court conservative Republicans in the state and not lose too many uber-conservative Democrats, 10% of which actually voted for Strom Thurmond, the Dixiecrat candidate, which was a third party that once was affiliated with the Democrats, but were staunch segregationists and decided to run on their own. Now, religion, some say, is what paved the way for Harry Truman in 1948 to win states like Virginia and other places in the South and Midwest where there was a heavy population of Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, and other evangelical faiths. So this is a great example of politicking in motion. based on identity politics, if you will, on religion as being a force to win over voters. I've also pulled out a couple other election resources from the Adam Matthews collections to demonstrate the Trump-Clinton phenomenon is not entirely new. So this one is from a document in 1956 when Dwight Eisenhower was seeking re-election and running against Adlai Stevenson, his Democratic challenger. This document comes from a new think tank that was that was developed to analyze the political landscape in the late 20th century. It's called the Institution for Motivational Research, and it's led by a guy called Ernst Stichter, a European technocrat who studied everything from the habits of children who watch TV cartoons to why consumers prefer certain ketchup brands. And in this case, he's writing about why people vote and how people vote. And the conclusion of the think tank was that issues or political problems don't matter, that voters vote because of an emotional attachment, or what it says here is the emotional reactions of the voters to the candidate. And I'm not sure of the science behind this or how much Dichter's study is based on science or even the accuracy of whatever its methodology is. But I am pretty certain that issues have not mattered in this election in 2016. Voters have been swayed by the negative portrayals of both Trump and Clinton. And just as Dichter said in 1956 that trust would matter, very much in 2016 trust mattered. And therefore, I think this is a really good example of how nothing's really changed in politics. Some years, issues do matter, but in years like 2016 and 1956, it's as much based on trust or emotional attachments to the candidates. The second document I wanted to show is the 1972 platform of the American Independent Party, which is a third-party campaign originally waged by populist George Wallace, who in 1968 won a number of states running as an ultra-right-wing alternative to Richard Nixon. Now, in many ways, Donald Trump is the successor to George Wallace's brand of populism. In 1972, where this platform comes from, Wallace actually didn't run for this American Independent Party, but he ran as a Democrat, and he won a number of primaries before eventually losing out to George McGovern, who won the majority of western and northeastern states. For Wallace, he was shot during that campaign in Maryland. It left him paralyzed and literally unable to run for president. That same year, the American Independent Party, Wallace's former party, nominated Congressman John Schmitz to a platform that propelled the same ideas that Wallace called for: state rights, anti-abortion, gun ownership, welfare subsidies for able-bodied persons, and low taxation. The platform noted that although equal rights for women may seem desirable, in practice it means a great loss, not gain. That's actually in the document. It's incredible to believe that that's only 45 some odd years ago. Now, the American Independence Party only garnered about 1.5% of the votes on Election Day. But in 2016, guess who its candidate was in California? That's right, Donald Trump. And I'm not inclined to think that the platform has actually changed all that much. So I guess in conclusion, what there is to say is, that party politics and national politicking has remained quite consistent over the years. There are exceptions to this, and there are certainly changes, but the rhythms of this remain the same. And so I'll leave you with a quote from Mark Twain and Charles Dudley Warner, who in the book The Gilded Age, published in 1874, said, "History never repeats itself, but the kaleidoscopic combinations of the pictured present often seem to be constructed out of the broken fragments of antique legends." And in many ways, we can see the 2016 election as being constructed out of those broken fragments of some of these documents that I've presented here today. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for that, Mike. That was a really interesting look at some of the key themes that have dominated presidential elections in the past, and I think we can all see how they link up to the present as well. Talking of which, I do want to look at one more resource for this webinar, African American Communities, and I want to use it to demonstrate some of the search functionality in our resources and look at mid-20th century elections from an African American perspective. So in any Adam Matthew resource, you can find the advanced search feature at the top right of the page. And from here, you can search for keywords within the resource. So Keywords Anywhere will search all printed full text documents, all of the metadata, all of the secondary features, every bit of text in the resource. Alternatively, you can choose to limit your search to a particular field, title, places, organizations and associations. You can also use a proximity value. So if you're searching for 2 keywords but only want to return results that appear within a certain number of words of each other, you would put a figure in here and the search will return that. And there's the option to restrict your search by date or by one of these filters. And those filters can be applied after conducting your initial search if you find that you want to refine it. So for now, I'm going to run a search for election and presidency. And let's say for the sake of argument that I'm interested in the mid-20th century. So I can hit search. This gives us 112 results. Like I said, you can then filter to refine your search further. You can also reorder your search results based on these columns. So for example, clicking this little arrow by date will put them in date order. So here we have our documents that are related to presidential elections in the mid-20th century. Let's take a look at one of them. Now, Mike mentioned the 1956 election between Eisenhower and Stevenson, and this document is from their previous showdown in 1952. Now, when it comes to a search, full text results will be displayed as snippets beneath the metadata, and you can expand the metadata to see your search terms highlighted in here as well. If you click one of these snippets, it will take you to the document, and again your search terms will be highlighted in the full text. So this is campaign literature for Stevenson, and it makes a concerted effort to appeal to African American voters. So it focuses on issues such as segregation laws, somewhat ironically, as his running mate was a segregationist. It's housing, civil rights, the place of African Americans in the military. And as it happened, Georgia did come out strongly in support of Stevenson, but not the African American community of Atlanta, who voted for Eisenhower by and large. And this was replicated across the country because the election witnessed a landslide for Eisenhower. Now, as well as documentary resources, African American communities includes a series of oral histories and videos which can be accessed from the main navigation bar. The audio interviews have been sourced from the Weeksville Heritage Center in New York, while the video interviews come from Washington University Libraries and the Atlanta History Center. And to conclude this webinar, I just wanted to show a short clip of one of the videos. First, a bit about functionality. You'll see that the video player appears on the left of the screen. You can click this button if you want to see a larger high-res version of the player. And you can choose to put on subtitles as well to compensate for losing the transcript. Now, the transcript is on the right of the screen when you have the small player. It can be searched using this search box. And these time codes, when you click on them, it will jump straight to that piece of the interview. So this interview is with Lonnie King, who was an activist in 1960 in Atlanta, Georgia. And this section of the interview that I've picked out is discussing the 1960 presidential election.
Now, mind you now, the African American community was not necessarily Democratic. A lot of them were Republicans in 1960. Lincoln Republicans, and not these kind of folks that we have now, but Lincoln Republicans, because Lincoln had, quote, freed the slaves, unquote. They switched. So that vote that act was the catalyst that became the margin of victory. And many people wrote about it during that time. You don't hear it now, but that's what was written during that time. But there was one city, Miss Merritt, that did not go with the black communities around the country and switch from being Republican. And guess where that city was?
Atlanta.
Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta still voted Republican in the black community. But you know why? Because John Calhoun was a master organizer. The best I have ever seen. The best. He taught me how to organize. The man was a genius at it. And he delivered the votes for Richard Nixon. It didn't make any difference because of the other, but the point is he did his job where he lived.
So there you go, there's a little snippet of the oral history features, which is a great addition to African American communities. So hopefully that's been a useful introduction to our resources and an interesting look at the history of US presidential elections. I'd like to thank Dr. Cullinane again for his participation and sign off by pointing you in the direction of our website. Where you can find information on all of our products, where you can fill in a form that will allow you to trial any of our resources, where you can find videos, including recorded webinars such as this one, and a contact form where there's details if you'd like to get in touch with us. Thank you very much for your time today.